Lux Occult is part of the Green Mushroom Podcast Network.
I call to you, lady, come quickly to me. Hear me when I call to you. May my prayers be set before you like incense. May the lifting up of my hands be like the evening sacrifice. Set a guard over my mouth, lady. Keep watch over the door of my lips. Do not let my heart be drawn to what is evil, so that I take part in wicked deeds, along with those who are evildoers. Do not let me taste of their delicacies. Let a righteous woman strike me. That is a kindness. Let her rebuke me. That is oil on my head. My head will not refuse it, for my prayer will still be against the deeds of evildoers. Their leaders will be cast down from the cliffs, and the wicked will learn that my words were well spoken. They will say, as one plows and breaks up the earth, so our bones have been scattered at the mouth of the grave. But my eyes are ever fixed upon you, sovereign lady. In you I take refuge. Do not give me over to death. Keep me safe from the traps set by evildoers, from the snares they have laid for me. Let the wicked fall into their own nets, while I pass by in safety. Amen. That was a modified version of Psalm 141. Hello and welcome to Lux Occult. This is the podcast where we gleefully taunt the mundane, butcher the Latin and most other languages, and we also discuss a variety of occult and adjacent topics, exploring the intersections of magic, art, science, philosophy, technology, and so much more through the lens of chaos magic. This is occultism for everyone. I'm your host, Strata, and if you are hearing the sound of my voice right now, that means that this show and magic are for you if you want them. There are a lot of different ways to be more free in one's life, in one's world, and using magic or making space for a spiritual practice in your life can be one of those ways. As always, I do not speak for anybody but myself. Others can, will, and should disagree with the things that I say sometimes, and how we ever learn anything new if we were all in agreement on all things after all anyway. And like those who attempt to be reasonable should always be willing to do, I am continuously adapting my perspectives and points of view based on new evidence. Alright, so I'm really stoked to bring you a great conversation I had with David Shoemaker about Aleister Crowley, Thelema, and David's new book, The Way of the Will, Thelema in Action. We get into some really interesting philosophical territory about how Thelema might differ from other traditions or religions where thinking about the founder is concerned. We'll talk about the man, Crowley, versus his work, and how David thinks about the relationships of those two different things. We'll also get into the idea of the magical will, as in Thelema, which means will, and how that might be different from, simply just doing whatever you want, based on perhaps the urgings of the ego. David will get into a bit of the idea of Kabbalistic psychology, just applying the Golden Dawn sort of style of the tree to doing personal development work and looking for ways to balance different energies and dynamics within one's life using that system. There's still a lot of stigma surrounding issues related to mental health, even in the year of Our Lady 2024, and I really appreciate that David's work provides inroads for people to do that type of stuff. So while it's not a terribly long conversation, time was pretty short when we recorded, it did do a lot to help me better understand the perspectives that Thelemites might have about approaching all of this stuff. There's a lot of misconceptions that I think I had that were cleared up by the conversation, so it was very valuable and I appreciate it a lot. During the break, I'm going to share the 23rd book of the Green Mushroom Project's 23 Bibliomancy Scripture, which we discovered last Sunday, June 23rd. Really excited about it. I'll also share a little bit about the Void House gathering that we had in Portland, Oregon, and about the Pirates' Reville there and how Douglas Adams became a saint. We're also going to be hearing a few tracks from the Chicago-based group Lost Legion, as well as the 23 Bibliomancy Sound Magic track. Let me remind you that if you're into the show or the other work I've got going on, you can support it on Patreon. If you do so, you can take a bibliomancy break with me, and there are no tiers or levels or whatever, so give as you will. Buy Me a Coffee is an option for those who wish to show their support with a one-time donation and don't want to do the whole Patreon rigmarole. Thank you so much to everybody who is already doing this. Your support literally makes this show possible by allowing me to cover the expenses associated with making it, thereby justifying to myself the not inconsiderable amount of time that I spend making it. So many thanks for the support, which is making this show possible. Although I'm a pretty introverted person and don't use social media very much due to this, I'm not there checking on it every day or anything like that, but that certainly doesn't mean that I don't want to hear from you. I'm beyond lucky to have such amazing listeners, collaborators, cohorts, core conspirators, etc. And I always welcome people's thoughts, questions, comments, suggestions, arcane revelations, or whatnot. You can reach me at luxoccultpod@gmail.com or hit me up on Instagram at luxoccultpod. All right, getting into the interview today, I wanted to note that regular listeners of the show might have noticed that, well, I find it really cool and interesting and important to look at Crowley's work just to get a better understanding of modern occultism and magic. It's been hugely influential. I'm also not somebody who's ever kind of been interested in experimenting with his tech to the extent that I would follow some prescriptive path regarding it or anything like that. I've kind of joked around in the past that I prefer to do my own sloppy syncretism based on poor scholarship. Thank you very much. Obviously, there's much more going on there than that. This is just me being glib. And all this being said, I have many friends who are super into this stuff and have found it really useful and helpful in their lives. Not everything is for everyone, and as we'll discuss a little bit in the interview today, there's not one right way to do spirituality, despite some of the claims made by various spiritual groups who suppose that they have found the one true way or whatever. This sort of idea of the one true way is something that I would like to question philosophically, often and with rigor. And I do think that this attitude is very much in line with some of what we're going to be talking about today in the interview with David. So Dr. David Shoemaker is a clinical psychologist in private practice, specializing in Jungian and cognitive behavioral psychology. David is the chancellor and prolocutor of the Temple of the Silver Star, a long-standing member of the OTO and AA, and has many years of experience training initiates in these traditions. His popular Living Thelema podcasts have appeared regularly since 2010, and he is the author of the widely praised book Living Thelema. In addition to his work in magic and psychology, David is a composer and musician, and you can learn more by visiting livingthelema.com. All right, as I said, super stoked to present this conversation to you and to roll into it. Let's hear a track from Lost Legion from their album Behind the Concrete Veil. This is Disposed.
I think you're profit. You let me go. You let me know. I am exposed. The transportation of human souls to punch a time card, then decompose. There is this gross. We will explode.
Well, my guest today is David Shoemaker. David, how are you today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks so much for taking the time. I appreciate it. So as we get into it here with your book, The Way of the Will, Thelema in Action, could you give us a little bit of context about yourself and your approach to writing this?
Of course, yeah. I'm roughly 30 years into my thelemic journey. I'm a clinical psychologist, a psychotherapist in private practice, and I was practicing therapy. Actually, I was a graduate student at the time I discovered magic, and then fairly soon thereafter found my way to the work of Crowley and Thelema, and through kind of the doorway of Kabbalistic psychology and Kabbalistic tree of life and things like that. So I began the journey then, got initiated into a couple organizations, and I've spent the last 30 years doing my own personal work in that regard, and then pretty early on began assuming some administrative roles in the organizations I was in, and that increased over the years. And now I'm administering some groups myself, and really feeling very fulfilled with that, and working with some great people. And so it's been a journey of throughout my whole adult life, basically a journey of intertwining of my professional approach to therapy, but also my inner work with this tradition, and sort of trying to figure out how to bring all of that to the world in a useful way.
Right on. Awesome. So for people that are like completely unfamiliar with what Thelema is, could we give a little bit of context there?
Yeah, there is a lot of misunderstanding about Crowley and Thelema. So the word Thelema is the Greek word for will, and that is the will that is used in that famous phrase of Crowley's, "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law." That is the first point of frequent misunderstanding I wanted to clear up. That the idea here is that we have a basic nature as a human. Each of us has a unique basic nature, a way of being, a way of living and moving in the world that is called the true will. And the law of Thelema, "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law," means that each of us is bound by natural law in order to live most efficiently and bring the best of ourselves to the world. We have to figure out what our true will is, and then try to, as best we can, to create a life where we can live that out with some passion and joy and efficiency and power. So the misunderstanding part is that often "do what thou wilt" is treated as if what it's saying is do whatever you want. But in fact, as Crowley often pointed out, it's the opposite of that. It's many times you'll want something, but that's your ego. You know, what the spiritual self is really wanting, what the divine self, the universal will, is really wanting as it works through you as an individual, is for you to be yourself as vibrantly as possible. And that may not be something your ego wants. So it's the opposite of "do whatever you want." It's kind of like do what the divine needs you to be doing, is perhaps a more concise way of putting that.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I mean, looking at this kind of concept through the lens of like other traditions and stuff, there's other folks that would be like, okay, well, just because you don't realize it, God does have a plan for you. And, I think that there's that same kind of like, that religious faith there that we can sort of like, that makes sense. Okay. Very cool.
Yeah. And for some people, Thelema is a religious approach where the divine is in sort of in a Gnostic sense, that the divine spark within each person is like, whether you call it God or something else, is the divine presence within each of us. And it is that part of us that has the will that needs to be honored. This overlaps with Jungian psychology. I'm a Jungian oriented psychologist, and what Carl Jung talks about, of course, is the everyday ego is the us that goes through the world and goes to the grocery store and goes to work and does all that. But the self with the capital S is the real spiritual center of who we are. And so that's like that's the psychological framing of the same principle, that we have to sort of set aside the whims of the ego and try to listen to our deepest center.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm curious, like, just from a sort of philosophical perspective, why do you think there is such a misunderstanding about this word will in our culture?
Well, I can only speak to my experience of why there's misunderstanding around Crowley's use of it.
Yeah, that's what I mean, of course, yeah.
And the seeds of that were in the fact that in the 1920s, Crowley was just, some disgruntled people who were working with him in Italy went to what's the equivalent of like the National Enquirer, the sort of tabloid level journalism, and they published these fantastical stories about all these horrible things that supposedly happened, but didn't. And also that whole thing of, oh, Crowley's the wickedest man in the world. That was just strictly tabloid stuff. He was simply being an advocate for personal, religious, and sexual freedom, really about 40 years too early in terms of the sexual revolution of the 60s. And so there was just this predisposition against Crowley, regardless of whether it was the concept of will or anything else. It's just this idea that he's this evil person, and that kind of stuff, people aren't going to dig too deeply unless they're actually interested in it. So that stuff gets perpetuated very easily for decades. And then each new generation sort of hears the same silly horror stories and without investigation might easily just believe it.
Yeah, so this we are getting into another thing that I wanted to ask you about is the idea of, the Crowley as a person, an individual versus, the work that he did. And then, yeah, there's all kinds of sensational stories out there that we hear, but there's also, stories that we could say like, okay, well, he probably wasn't a great dude to be married to or something like that, where it's
Right.
like, there definitely were some, nobody's perfect, of course. And I think that there's definitely places with Crowley's life where it's like, ooh, that's a little bit of a cringe or whatever, but I'm
Yeah,
curious to
yeah.
hear what your sort of like relationship is there kind of, and this is obviously a concept that comes up in our culture all the time in terms of like trying to separate people's actions from their work and at what point do we do
Right.
that, and lots of interesting philosophical stuff there, of course. So yeah, curious to hear about it for Crowley and you.
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, there's definitely cringe moments. If you look at Crowley's biography, you do get the impression that he might be one of those people that was fascinating to know, but you really could only take him in small doses, perhaps. But one of the things that's most important about this is understanding that part of this, I think, is the contrast we expect in Western culture when it comes to a religious tradition, because looking at Judeo-Christian traditions, especially like Christianity, where there's an explicit doctrine of trying to be Christ-like, trying to be like the founder of the religion because they behaved perfectly.
Mhm.
But no one said that about Thelema. No one said that that's the point of Thelema, or that Crowley is an exemplar of personal behavior. So that's speaking directly to your point. I think that the Thelemic tradition, there may be sort of fundamentalists who are more Crowleyites than Thelemites, but for the most part, Thelemites are pretty independently minded and aren't going to be sheepishly following anyone, including Crowley, in terms of their personal behavior.
Okay, so that's a good distinction, the Crowleyites versus the Thelemites.
Yeah.
Okay.
Also, I think, we don't have contemporary biographers. When we're thinking about Jesus's behavior as a person, to the extent that there was even a
Mhm.
human person involved there, versus the Muhammad or something like that. Crowley is a modern figure with modern biographies and almost within living memory. So it's very easy to see all the faults and the stuff that is ugly. Whereas someone who lived hundreds or thousands of years ago, there's no way we're really going to get like a glimpse of them as a human. So
Mhm.
I think the expectation of behavior to be aspired to without all the warts of the human person is what screws up sometimes people's ability to deal with Crowley. But to the other part of your question about sort of man versus tradition, or man versus religious approach, I kind of think of it like a scientist. Like what Crowley really left behind, most importantly, I think, is a principle of the will, but then also a whole bunch of practical tools that from the beginning, the intention was that each person would try them out and make up their own mind about the results and about what that taught them about reality. So I would no sooner throw out the laws of gravitation because I didn't like Newton. It's sort of like, you can take the pieces that make sense for you without that meaning anything about the person who invented the tools or who, wrote the book or something. So that's kind of a pragmatic way I look at it.
Okay, right on. In kind of approaching Crowley and, getting into this stuff, this kind of
Mhm.
corpus of work that he left behind that, people are kind of decoding and everything. I'm curious to hear about your approach there and how you think it might be different from other folks who have kind of done maybe adjacent work.
Well, certainly the depth psychology aspect of it. I'm not the only one out there, bringing psychology and magic together by any means, but I think that's one of the distinctive things about my approach to this is that I'm trying to bring my myself as a therapist, my experience as a therapist, and therefore my experience as a person who coaches personal change. Try to bring that to this particular religious and philosophical tradition, so that when I'm writing about it, I'm trying to give people something that they can put down the book and use right away. I'm not focusing on history or philosophy as much as practice and lived experience. So I just have a pragmatic bent that way. So I don't particularly write in an academic style or in a, where there's a lot of focus on comparative traditions, just kind of talking about my experiences living a Thelemic life and teaching it and training others. So that's probably the kernel of it. But what's, most unique or different about my approach, I suppose.
Okay, yeah, right on. And that definitely makes sense. Actually, I read your first book, Living Thelema, a while back, maybe
Great.
3 years ago or so. And it definitely elucidated much of what I was confused about in terms of all that stuff. So very cool.
Hey, Luxa, what do you have there? It looks like a tattered old Discord server.
Oh, this old thing? It's pretty beat up. But if I do this...
Sweet! Now that you peeled off the outer bits, it looks fresh as hell.
We should call it the Green Machine.
Awesome! I fucking hate it!
That's okay. It should function alright. But it would probably work better if we had more people.
Yeah, we have an awesome crew of chaots, occultists, sorcerers, witches, and weirdos. But there's always room for more.
Absolutely. If you'd like to take part in any of our many chats, rituals, workshops, clubs, and more, hit me up and I will send you a link. You can reach me at luxoccultpod@gmail.com or at luxoccultpod on Instagram.
And remember, resist.
Greetings, it's me, Luxa from the future. I hope you're enjoying my chat with David Shoemaker so far. We'll be hearing the rest of that conversation in just a few minutes here, including talking about the parts of The Way of the Will that David enjoyed writing the most and sharing the most, as well as getting into some thoughts about magical groups and teachers and more. But first, I wanted to share some updates about what we have going on with Green Mushroom Project, beginning with the 23rd and final book of our 23 Bibliomancy scripture. So this is a giant cut-up project that we've been compiling using the 23rd line of the 23rd page of whatever book tells us it wants to participate on the 23rd day of the month for the last 23 months. We then roll dice to figure out what line order these lines will appear in. There's been some really amazing and prophetic feeling aspects to what's arisen through this, which is kind of not really that uncommon when using the cut-up technique. It can be really powerful as a divinatory tool. The sort of narrative that's arisen in the text has at times been full of conflict and turmoil, and I think that what we've brought to this sort of story in this last chapter, if you will, is a really beautiful way to end our work with the final 23rd book. So 23 months is, of course, a pretty long time to commit to a magical experiment, and I feel really proud of us that we were able to carry out the thing to this first phase of completion. Thanks so much to the many, many people who participated in this, and thanks to those who joined me the other night on the Discord for a discussion about the number 23, Discordianism, the Illuminatus Trilogy by Robert Shea and Robert Anton Wilson, Temple of Psychic Youth, or Psychic Individuals, and their idea of control with a capital C, as well as talking about ways that we're dissolving its hold on us and increasing agency and more. It was a really fucking rad discussion. I really appreciated hearing what you all had to say and getting to know some new people as well, so fuck yeah. Alright, so here it is, book 23 of the 23 Bibliomancy scripture. Sinks. This is achieved by judicious use of abstention and by arousing lust, as if by Burroughs's expertly targeted scissors, and suited for the craft. Without perfect love and ruler who stood with his back to her. Adventure gestured around with his sword at thee if they were paper, and send the boat spinning. Feel that while we are constrained to accept these axioms, we need not. Had slipped away into some back room. He noticed, broomstick could pierce dragon scale, and the fearless solidity of mountains. Alright, fuck yeah. There was a lot of different interesting perspectives shared about this final book the other night. One thing I really liked about it is the suggestion that broomstick, something which is sort of associated with domesticity or perhaps softness or motion or even transportation, right? Something like this can pierce dragon scale and the fearless solidity of mountains. There's just so much there in the metaphor of the mountain, and all of the rest of it too is like a spiritual path, or the card from the Lenormand, the mountain. The metaphor of tiny plants breaking through slabs of concrete comes up as being important here for me as well, and it fits really well into some of the things that we've been talking about magically as well. So I have some fun plans for the 23 bibliomancy scripture going forward, but I'm definitely very stoked that we've brought this baby home and that we can now enjoy what we have found and explore it. One thing that we've been using it for is to plan our Pirates Revels. This is a ritual party or party ritual focused on reminding ourselves that we are captains of our own ships, and there's some fun stuff from pop culture and things that we bring into it. I've written a Void journal entry about the recent Pirates Revel at Void House Gathering 0, which you can find a link to in the show notes if you'd like to check it out. You can hear about how Douglas Adams became a saint and all of the rest of it. Since we're discussing bibliomancy, I'm going to go ahead and share the passage that we found on the 42nd page when we conducted bibliomancy from the book Douglas Adams' The More Complete Hitchhiker's Guide, which there was a bunch of synchronicities that led us to this point. And what we found was also quite synchronous too, because it had to do with some of the things that we'd been discussing earlier in the day. So thank you to Douglas Adams, who reminds us purely by chance that some thinkers have chosen to see it as a final and clenching proof of the non-existence of God. Alright, cheers. So there's lots of fun and free activities planned on the Green Machine Discord server, home of the Green Mushroom Haifu Sigil Project and Void House. Join us for our weekly Fungal Friday chats about different magical topics. It's a great place to come and ask questions about magic or occultism, because we have a lot of people who are into sharing about what's worked for them in their practices. We also have a monthly rune study group and a book club in which we are languorously and luxuriously discussing the book 6 Ways by Aidan Wachter. We've also been discussing doing some pretty fun pop culture magic stuff coming up here that you can be a part of as well. So in addition to learning cool stuff about magic and occultism and all of that, there are also several opportunities for learning about consent, spotting red flags and signs of abuse, and other cool stuff that will help people maintain agency, enjoy better relationships, and move more safely in the world. I feel incredibly proud that we at Void House are offering these resources to people in the chaos magic and broader occult communities. From what I've seen, adding a better and more robust understanding of what consent is and how it relates to magical work to the equation will be an opportunity to forge some new ground magically, and I'm really excited to be a part of that. I've been taking some classes this summer called Consent and Leadership from an organization called Consent Academy, which is pretty rad. Check them out if you're interested in learning more. Doing this in order to sort of like better fill the role that I have in all of this and to serve the community better. I'm definitely also doing this as sort of like service to Hecate, who I'm very into, as people probably have noticed. And so this is sort of one of the reasons that this consent stuff is so exciting to me as well. Check out the bonus episode between number 80 and 81 of this show to see a video presentation about Green Mushroom Project and Void House. We're going to be returning to my chat with David Shoemaker shortly. After the conversation, we're going to be doing listener mail and shoutouts, and I will send you on your way with a blessing. I'm going to break that fucking evil eye again, and the Green Mushroom Project Statement of Resistance, as well as the 23 Bibliomancy Spooky Halloween Birthday Sound Magic track. Alright, really stoked to present the rest of my chat with Dr. David Shoemaker. Taking you back into that is another song from Lost Legion's Behind the Concrete Veil album. This is Silhouettes in Blue Light. hear about your thoughts. This is something that you do spend quite a bit of time on in The Way of the Will. The idea of like vetting magical teachers and organizations, and maybe we could even start with like, is it your opinion that one needs to have a magical teacher?
No, I think some people, perhaps many people, can benefit greatly from it, but I would never say that everyone needs one or that everyone needs to be in a particular tradition. Obviously, people can attain, spiritual enlightenment without any tradition because that has happened across history all the time. And so, no, I would never say you need a teacher, but Crowley goes into this in certain documents, but the idea is you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You don't have to fall into every pitfall that someone else has fallen into. There are ways to shorten those trials and those ordeals. And part of that is having someone who's already done the stuff you're doing give you some tips,
Mhm.
and we try to listen to our teachers and avoid some of the pitfalls. But I think most, certainly in any of the organizations I'm involved in, most of the people teaching this tradition are pretty respectful of the unique approach of their own students, the particular strengths and weaknesses and interests and so on of their students, so that there's plenty of latitude for individual experience, and people are pretty good about not imposing kind of expected beliefs, or if you don't approach it this way, then you'll never get anywhere. I think people are not too dogmatic about that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Very cool. Now, I'm curious if you would give some tips about, spotting possible like red flags that a teacher might
Mm.
not be a great fit or might not be perhaps even a safe person to spend time around.
Yeah, well, on that point, you're meeting a human being first, right? So
Sure.
uh, if you meet any human and you feel creeped out by him, that's not okay. You're not going to very likely get a lot of quality teaching out of somebody who you don't really want them in your house. So that said, I mean, of course, sometimes the things the teacher will say are legitimately challenging to us, and they may make us question ourselves in uncomfortable ways, like a therapist does. But that's kind of a different thing. What I'm talking about is if you just get like weird, creepy vibes, then that's important to listen to.
Mhm.
Likewise, if you're able to go to group events from a group you're considering joining, it's not always possible to do that as a member of the public, but if you can, see how that vibe is. If you just like you would decide if you want to be a part of a group of friends or not. If you're not socially comfortable, at least in the way anyone is when they walk into a room with a bunch of people they don't know, you know,
Mhm.
listen to that kind of voice within yourself in terms of what might be a good fit. But more sort of traditional lines, or more system related lines. One thing to look for is if you're joining a particular tradition, then the person who is purporting to be your teacher needs to have been trained in that tradition. I am aware of some Thelemic oriented, mostly online kind of schools out there where I know with certainty that the people running them didn't get the training, or perhaps and sort of a Anakin Skywalker sort of way, like started it and then decided that they were perhaps needing to be the boss already. So people preempted their own actual training, but are purporting to be teachers. And so that doesn't mean that someone in that position doesn't have something of value to teach. But if someone's claiming to represent a tradition, such as Thelema, then they should be able to trace how they were trained in that tradition. It's kind of a no-brainer. But sometimes people don't investigate that much. So questions to ask would be like, what system were you trained in? Were you trained by someone in doing all the things that you are now presently teaching in this group? Things like that, just to get right at the heart of their competence to convey a particular tradition. And again, that's just to close off this thread. If someone isn't claiming to represent tradition, if someone just says it's Joe's school of magic, I've never trained with anyone, but here's my thoughts, then no problem. That they're very transparent about it. So that's a separate issue.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point there. Asking a lot of questions is always good. That's a great, sort of vetting technique for any situation. And if people are getting uncomfortable by answering these questions, if they're getting offensive, those are also possible red flags. So yeah, very
Yeah,
cool. Thank you.
yeah, sure.
So as a mental health care professional and a magician, you said that, this is something that you've spent a lot of time kind of like weaving these concepts together and
Yeah.
wanting to offer useful things to the public. Can you give me some general thoughts about, I know this is kind of a difficult question to answer because this is such a huge, broad topic, but can you give me some general thoughts about the relationship of like the magician and mental health, perhaps?
Hmm. Sure. Well, Israel Regardie, one of the most prominent writers in Western ceremonial magic, always strongly recommended people coming in to study magic have already done some work in psychotherapy.
Mhm.
And the issue here is, and I'm not saying that I say anyone must have had therapy to start training in magic. I'm not meaning that at all. But what the overlap is kind of about, and what the principle there is that one of the things we must do in order to live out our full power and potential as humans and as magicians is to have stripped away illusions that we have about ourselves, to have stripped away the expectations that society or family or ourselves have placed on us, so that they obscure the truth of who we are. And that fundamentally is one of the things that happens in psychotherapy. Some people do that just by sort of their own independent path of self-knowledge, but therapy helps a lot in terms of discovering some of those blind spots, shadow stuff, as Jung would call it.
Mhm.
You know, not fooling ourselves about who we are, because if we're looking through a lens that is clouded like that, then we're not going to perceive the reality that we need to perceive clearly in order to do good magical work in the world. So therapy does that. Also, in Temple of the Silver Star, which is one of the organizations I administer, we the first order of training, that is the degrees in the outer order, include a lot of psychological self-analysis, and not therapy with me like professionally, but like just built into the order, balancing out the different parts of the psyche, the thinking and the feeling and sensing and intuition, so that when we start to gradually bring in more magical energy, more force, divine force, it's into a balanced person instead of into an unbalanced person with a lot of blind spots. That's just a recipe for something bad. So that's a basic answer.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I definitely agree. I'm a huge advocate for therapy. I can personally say I found it very useful in my own life, and I would
Sure.
recommend it to anybody who has access and feels that they
Everybody's
could be
got
helped.
something to learn. Yeah.
Yeah.
Three, Romeo, two, four, Yankee, Romeo, 7, Bravo, Delta, Quebec.
So I'm curious if you wouldn't mind telling me, like, what is your favorite part of this book? What was your like
Mm.
part of it that was really the most joyful for you to write, or you're the most excited to share with the world?
Well, I think I have two answers to that. The part that I think I'm really glad I finally got into print is the multi-part chapter on Kabbalistic psychology as it applies to the Thelemic world, Thelemic dispensation, Thelemic aeon, however you want to term it, the modern world as it is playing out now. That chapter just crystallized a lot of the stuff that's been bouncing around in my head for many years, and I was glad to get that down. So that was satisfying to write. The part that was most sort of cathartic and I think necessary for me in my personal journey was the personal memoir of the Holy Guardian Angel. That's the last chapter, the final chapter, which is my story of what happened during that kind of
Mm.
you know, overturning event of spiritual awakening back in 2004. I should clarify for listeners, just in case, that the Holy Guardian Angel is sort of a synthetic term that we use to describe whatever that is our own personal divine presence, whether we can see that as within us or external to us. that's what that term holy guardian angel is. So that's a point of misunderstanding sometimes.
Okay, right on. Thank you.
So that chapter was probably the most cathartic. I don't know if I could go as far as joyous, but certainly needed and cathartic.
That makes a lot of sense. Right on. So I'm hoping if you wouldn't mind telling me one of your favorite stories about Crowley or one of your favorite things about him or what he did. It can be funny or non-funny, serious, whatever you're into.
Yeah, I think it's not as much a story as it is an observation that struck me from the very beginning of my explorations of Crowley, is just how funny he is as a writer.
His poetry is hilarious. Oh my God. Yes.
Yeah, sometimes it's the poetry, sometimes it's, like if you read some of the book reviews that he published in the Equinox in the early 20th century, that just
Very
ripping
catty.
people to shreds. Yeah. You do not want to end up on the other end of his criticism in that way. But then also just slyly kind of winking at the reader in various of his writings, like instructional writings and such. He's trying to explain a point, and he knows that he's using like a sort of thinly veiled crude sexual metaphor or something, and you can tell he knows that some people are getting it, and he's sort of winking at the readers. So things like that just struck me early on as, okay, this is especially, I was coming out of this sort of modern cultural misapprehension of Crowley, that there was something evil about him or something. And so I start reading some of his basic works, and, what you get is like a very hyper intelligent, interesting, humorous, nuanced person. And so that's sort of my Crowley humorous thing.
All right, right on. Thank you. So is there anything that I didn't ask about that you would like to mention or discuss? Or are there any questions that you would like to ask me?
I suppose I would only want to flag a few of the training opportunities that are out there that I can help people with if they're interested. So maybe I can just mention some websites and
please.
upcoming events and things. One thing we haven't talked about at all in terms of something accessible to everyone immediately, if you're interested, is every 2 years here in Raleigh, North Carolina, we do a convention that is a Thelemic conference that is open to the public, regardless of any membership in any groups. It's called ThelemaCon. And so if you go to ThelemaCon.org, you can find out about that. It's October 4, 5, 6 this year, 2024 in Raleigh. And, I'll be speaking there, Richard Kaczynski, Lon Milo Duquette, and many, many others. But my primary avenue of service in Thelema is through the organizations I administer, Temple of the Silver Star, which is TOTSS.org. And I also am a representative of AA, and that can be accessed through onestarinsight.org. I do have my professional therapy and coaching practice, professional life coaching, and you can go to dr-shoemaker.com if you're interested in that angle. I don't take clients who I'm also supervising in a magical sense. Those are separate worlds for me, but just want to make sure people knew of the resources.
Okay, right on. Well, my next question was going to be where listeners can find your work, but I think that covers all the bases.
Yes. I think so. Oh, well, actually not quite all the bases. I forgot to mention. I've done a podcast called Living Thelema, of course, since 2010, and it used to be monthly. Now it's kind of occasional when I feel like doing it. But that's the website's livingthelema.com. There's a YouTube channel for Living Thelema and for Temple of the Silver Star. So some additional online resources there.
Okay, right on. Well, that makes sense. Podcasting is a wild amount of work. So,
yep.
Very cool. Well, David, thank you so much for taking the time to hang out with me today. I really appreciate it.
Well, it's a pleasure to talk to you. I really enjoyed the questions and the interaction. So thanks for having me.
Man, get out
Welcome to the party, boy cat. Alright, thanks so much, David Shoemaker. Check out the show notes to find links to livingthelema.com and the other stuff that he mentioned a few minutes ago. There was a lot to think about in that conversation for me, which I really appreciated. I think that in the past I've sometimes mistakenly misapplied thinking where Thelema might be concerned. I guess they're thinking that, like, you know, people who are into a certain tradition might look up to or model behavior off of people who are founders or leaders in that tradition, right? What would Jesus do is sort of a touchstone for a lot of people, right? But I suppose if a philosophy is based on doing your own thing, then it need not be that way. This conversation definitely did a lot to clear up some of the philosophical questions I had regarding Crowley and his work and people's interactions with it and all that. I definitely still have some lingering general philosophical hang-ups. I usually do. I think that for me there's some cognitive dissonance surrounding whether or not one's individual magical will would best be discovered through following prescriptive path laid out by somebody else versus like finding and following your own. It's sort of like, you know, if we want to draw a dichotomy between Crowley and Austin Osman Spare or something like that, although I'm not sure if that's a fair dichotomy. I think that drawing that dichotomy might be falling into the trap of binary biased thinking anyway. But anyway, I suspect that having more discussions about the semantics surrounding all this and everything like that with more people who are into it would do a lot to clear all of that up as well. So if you have thoughts about all this and want to talk about Crowley and Austin Osman Spare and the rest of it, let me know. You can find me at luxoccultpod@gmail.com or at luxoccultpod on Instagram. As I mentioned before the interview, I really appreciate that David has provided tools for doing psychological work and stuff, as well as the perspective from Israel Regardie that he shared about how it might be really beneficial to people who want to get into magic to do some type of therapy or other thing like that first. A lot of people find their way to spiritual practices or magical practices at times of intense stress or trauma, and for that reason people who are like new to it can be especially vulnerable. I mean, in addition to the vulnerability that having less information and fewer social connections and all of the rest of it would normally give people. So if this is you right now, if you're someone who's new in any group situation or whatever, remember that you are in a vulnerable position just by being new, and watch out for people who like to take advantage of vulnerable people. There are a lot of them out there. So this brings me to another thing I appreciate about the books that David has put out there, Living Thelema and The Way of the Will. They allow people who are interested in exploring this stuff to do so independently, thereby avoiding, you know, some major risks of becoming involved with, you know, predators or whatever. I can say from personal experience that there are a lot of them out there. And I think there's a sort of subset of people in the magical community who are a lot less interested in magic and a lot more interested in playing social games of power and controlling other people. It's not unique to occultism, of course. It's the same in any type of community, and especially anywhere where you see kind of, you know, power being played with at all. Things like politics or business or Hollywood is a great touchstone as well. People just don't seem to talk about it quite as much when it comes to occultism, but it's pretty gross out there, folks, especially for women. So if you're interested in joining up with a magical group, especially one that has like orders or ranks or is secretive about things, in addition to the psychological work that David mentioned, I'd recommend reading a couple of books which are not about magic, but which are about social interactions, which is kind of equally important to understand as magic in magical groups, right? Because magic is half of the scenario and the group is the other half. So the books I would recommend are Why Does He Do That by Lundy Bancroft, and there's actually an internet archive link to a PDF of that in the show notes. Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion by Robert Cialdini. Take Back Your Life, Recovering from Cults and Abusive Relationships by Janja Lalick, and The Heart of Dominance by Anton Fullman, which is a book about consent and consensual dominance practices for sexy times and fun. If you can identify what a consensual dominance practice looks like, you can begin to spot non-consensual dominance behaviors as well, and these are sometimes also called abuse tactics. So consent is, of course, what separates things in BDSM and other types of things like that from abuse, so understanding consent is another piece of the puzzle. It's something that I think our culture as a whole is sort of grappling with right now, as we began to see with stuff like the Me Too movement, which was about sexual consent in particular, but there are many other types and applications of this idea, you know, like being consented to be treated by a doctor is another one. The notion that the magical will and consent have a lot of intersection is something that I've been entertaining a lot, as I mentioned earlier. And I'm really stoked that Void House will be offering the magical community free educational opportunities about consent, as well as spaces to come together and discuss its alchemical properties and more. More conversations about consent in magical spaces is something that is very needed right now, and I'm incredibly proud that we're going to be offering tools and opportunities along these lines. We're going to be getting into listener mail and shoutouts, including a great question about the sound magic track I produced, Eyes of Your Eyes, which you've been hearing as the bumper music in this episode in just a second here. But I did want to give you an early shoutout and thank you to Aidan Wachter for speaking out about some of the issues with power dynamics in magical groups and more in a recent Patreon video. One of the reasons I'm studying singing is to sort of somatically, since it's a super physical activity, sort of somatically work through the fear I have surrounding speaking out about my own experiences. So I really respect it when others have the courage to do so. Fuck yeah. Okay, so before I forget, let me remind you that if you like the show and you're into what we've got going on here, you can support it on Patreon, which will entitle you to receive a bibliomancy break with me. Making this thing is, as you might suspect, a pretty wild amount of work, especially for just one intrepid podcaster, but it means a lot to me to be able to do it. Thank you so much to the people who are making the show possible by giving on Patreon or buy me a coffee, and to the people who are supporting the show by spreading the word. Tell your friends, allies, and magical associates about it, as well as everyone you meet at the next SBOT, Seance, Coven meeting, or ceremonial potluck you attend. You can also post about it on social media or write a positive review where that is possible. Both of these things are super helpful, so thank you so much to those of you who are doing so. And yes, don't forget to smash the fucking shit out of that follow or alarm button or whatever it is on your app so that you can get updates when new episodes come out. Alright, let's do listener mail and shoutouts. Shout out to the Void House visitors who attended Gathering 0 in Portland. It was so much fun getting to know you all a bit better, exploring the city and doing magic and everything together. It was so fun. Since we're talking about Thelema in this episode, I'll sort of phrase it this way. Because of some of the stuff that happened, it was a little unclear for a while if I would be able to continue to do the work that I'm doing. I nearly said, fuck it, this is too much to bear, and sort of abandoned the whole experiment, the podcast, and all of it. But it was love that kept me going. It helped me kind of dig in and find my own will to continue. There's that, conversation between love and will in Thelema. It's represented by the number 93. So for me, this was love for the quirky little community of misfits that we've assembled, and the desire to try to find ways to protect people in it from being treated the way that I'd been treated. Love for sharing about magic, which has been such an enriching and meaningful part of my world. And love for the work itself. I love that we're going to be opening a new chapter in modern occultism with Void House, one labeled Consent, and I feel deeply honored by the work that's been placed in my hands in this regard. Gratitude, Void. So thank you all so much for being part of what was a very healing experience, and one that was very heartening and has given me a lot of cautious optimism for the future. And I think cautious optimism is the wisest sort of optimism we can have. All right, shout out to Reverend Eric from Arnemancy and WizBiz podcast. Thank you so much for showing us around your gorgeous city. You did indeed succeed in causing us to fall in love with it. Really stoked about our little music collaboration. Fans of the TV series Twin Peaks will probably enjoy what we're going to be working on putting together. And aficionados might have recognized Psalm 141, which I read a modified version of at the beginning of the episode from Twin Peaks as well. So write to me at luxoccultpod@gmail.com or get me at luxoccultpod on Instagram and let me know if you remember what part of the show that comes up in. Or if you just want to talk about Twin Peaks and its occult symbolism, I'm into that too. Shout out to Alex, also from WizBiz podcast. Check that out if you're a fan of the show Adventure Time. It's very fun. It was really cool meeting you and enjoying some mead together in the Leather Works. Very fucking Portland. I love it. Shout out to Dark Star Magic. It was really cool checking out your store. I loved it, and I picked up some very cool grimoire shit there. I was distraught to hear about the unfortunate event that occurred, but I was also happy to hear that it was contained to a small area. Definitely calling on Praxidise for justice for that and all such similar types of things, because of course that type of incident is in no way isolated, unfortunately. Shout out to Ian from Lost Legion. Thank you so much for listening and for the kind words and for allowing me to share those tracks in today's episode. Fuck yeah. Find a link to Behind the Concrete Veil by Lost Legion on Bandcamp in the show notes. Shout out to Frank. Thank you so much for your assistance in helping to keep things chill, and to all of the Pocket Wizards. Really honored to be part of such a rad community. You all have so many cool and interesting things going on, and I love hearing about what you all are up to. Fuck yeah. Shout out to Bones, who wrote to ask about the track Eyes of Your Eyes and the high-pitched alternating tone that plays in part of it. Bones mentions, I feel like I've heard it somewhere, perhaps on the edge of sleep, which is very cool and interesting. So I wrote back that the audio is actually a binary tone containing a response to the messages supposedly received during the Rendlesham Forest event. The audio was created by Flood from XV Planus podcast, and who did some of the ritual work for the Eyes of Your Eyes track. There are internet sites where you can go and create your own binary tones like that, and it can be a fun way to play around with sound magic and stuff like that, so that could be a fun thing to check out. Shout out to everybody from XV Planus, as well as Unearthing Paranormalcy, and everybody on the Green Mushroom Podcast Network. Excited to share our conversation about simulation hypothesis coming up here pretty soon. Alright, shout out and thank you to everybody's messages that I did not get to or forgot to include in this one. I appreciate every missive that comes my way, whether or not it is included in the listener mail bag. Fuck yeah. If you'd like to send me thoughts, questions, comments, or suggestions, you can reach me at luxoccultpod@gmail.com, or you can find me on Instagram at luxoccultpod. Alright, I'm going to be sending you all on your way with the 23 Bibliomancy spooky birthday sound sigil track in just a few moments here, but I wanted to perform some quick magical work as part of this one. There's some stuff going on locally that would like to be dissipated, and conditions are perfect here at the moment. There's a pretty high-powered thunderstorm going on. You might have heard it in the background, not sure. Okay, so this is going to be a modified version of some old-school tech. Shout out to Brenda. Thank you so much for sharing the original version with me. I really appreciate it. It's been a helpful banishing practice, and I really enjoy it. Alright, let's break that fucking evil eye. Who shall thwart the evil eye? I shall thwart it, methinks, in the name of the Queen of Magic. 7 commandments so potent spake Persephone at the gateway to the underworld. Matter Hecka 1, Matter Rex 2, Matter Hecka 3, Matter Rex 4, Matter Hecka 5, Matter Rex 6, Matter Hecka 7. 7 Matter Heckas will thwart the evil eye, whether it be on man or beast, on house or field. Be thou in full health this hour, all, in the name of the sacred 3, and the invincible Queen of all realms. I trample upon the eye, as tramples the duck upon the lake, as tramples the swan upon the water, as tramples the horse upon the plain, as tramples the cow upon the earth, as tramples the host of elements, as tramples the host of elements. Power of wind I have over it, power of wrath I have over it, power of fire I have over it, power of thunder I have over it, power of lightning I have over it, power of storms I have over it, power of moon I have over it, power of sun I have over it, power of stars I have over it, power of firmament I have over it, power of the heavens I have over it, and of all of the worlds I have over it, power of the heavens and of all of the worlds I have over it. A portion of it upon the grey stones, a portion of it upon the steep hills, a portion of it upon the fast falls, a portion of it upon the fair meads, and a portion upon the great salt sea. She herself is the best instrument to carry it. The great salt sea, the best instrument to carry it. In the name of the three of life, in the name of the sacred three, in the name of all of the secret ones, and of all the powers together. Resist. Resist by maintaining sovereignty of the self. Resist by maintaining love of the self. Resist by maintaining fierce loyalty to love and pleasure. Resist with acts of radical kindness. Focus on the path to better times. Fuck yeah. Alright, well, while the world is ever full of nonsense, hopefully that has thoroughly dissipated any bad vibes you might be encountering. Thank you so much to David Shoemaker for taking the time to join me today. You can find links to all of his stuff in the show notes. Thanks again to Lost Legion for allowing me to include their tracks. Thank you so much for all of the support, and to everybody who's been helping, both seen and unseen. And most of all, thanks so much to you for listening. This is Lux Strata, reminding you to stay strong and stay fucking curious. Alright, here is the 23 Bibliomancy spooky Halloween birthday sound magic track. Cheers.
Green Mushroom Project, 23 Bibliomancy. Read by Old
She sees nothing around her but ghosts dragging her to the brightness of what she has lost. I shall face the battle of foundness, plunder and the electronic age is a world of
electronic age is the world in
building and development
become almost interchangeable as in music building and development, capacity building,
Earl's
strategy,
counter-real, after
all you do, female, and when you are wished to the peaceful mind, you are the
you are the
female slouch on the couch,
over-masculinization,
wild
slouched on the couch, it's less than
magic, and art, wild,
the direction of the letters clustered together, and again you must go like a potion. I will not say it is according to Diogenes or the Patrick's greater truth. Their axioms to keep them from
yellow
letters
together.
so yellow
I will not say
a global touches with
dreaming library,
on a global at the touch of the switch, the dreaming library
all 1998 to Brindle 2006, the biomechanics of closed chain exercises, multiple wax, shaped testimonial wax, dreaming library,
liquid wax, shaped and smoothly waxed, thus concealed as begun to appear. The name of the city is Spanish, the city of
the biomechanics,
he started to
chain
I
don't want to know, I don't want to see, us, have chosen to deepen our spiritual journeys by pursuing initiatory work. I alluded earlier to the problem of speed, but this is also a problem. Then the priests shall put these curses in writing, washing them off into the water.
But this also is a problem. Then the priest shall put these curses in writing.
Zoe met eyes, but
Zoe met eyes with the word
naturally, since we're talking about
naturally, since we're talking about creating a 7 sets of 6 letter rising.
but this is a 40 situation.
The situation
place
successfully replaced or overcome the existing fire.
But I really am stuck. What does possibly hardwired?
What does possibly hardwired into the souls of some that actually
clean that it appeared
to have just been washed?
8.
The goddess Strife is treated unjustly by the immortals, for they do not want to walk where the eagle eyes are too deep holes, and the thyroid cartilage is the rather large structure that forms the Adam's apple. Reiterate that they have to be understood as
coming in degrees,
a powerful
along and sliding.
conjuration.
A powerful
The angel
conjuration. The angel Sadakiel appears to the conjurer.
A powerful conjuration. The angel Tacitus.
Eloquence, most necessary to gain your ends or maintain. On the night of the dark moon, while you are sitting quietly at your dark, can you trust the silent knowing and serving others? Try to remove the suffering brotherhood. Once you to dissolve the sugar, loose the cover with a lid, and set aside to create the space for the journey to occur. Our creation stories, the origin of strawberries is important. Sky Womans, all of these, knowers of sacrifice, cleanse their defilements by practice. Casinomancy, divination by a sieve suspended on shears, transgender news, since gay and mainstream media didn't cover it, whom had long titles and honorifics both before and output from AI. It's sort of a dossier ritual with a my bag, because they're so new. Figured I'd give it up if anyone asked. Nobody said a outer planet transit that it accompanies, but the event cannot be described without the stigma of having abandoned his parents and his ancestors. But this is preferable to an isolated existence, lonely, bounded by a high brick wall.
Without the stigma of having abandoned his parents and his ancestors. But this is preferable to an isolated existence, lonely, bounded by a high brick wall.
Welcome to XV Planet.
Greetings, friends, fiends, and lovers of strange and wondrous things. My name is Flood, and I am the host of XV Planets, a bi-weekly podcast of the odd and unusual. The core of XV Planets is a documentary-style exploration into paranormal investigations that I and my ever-evolving group of magical misfits conduct. We take a look at the history, the mystery, then go see it for ourselves, and then we bring that experience, and on occasion, that evidence, to your ears. Alongside the investigations, you'll find a treasure trove of other content, like interviews with authors, art historians, mediums, UFO researchers, cryptid hunters, fellow paranormal investigators, as well as deep dives into the arts, exploring topics like the Killing Joke frontman Jazz Coleman's magical practices and how that propelled the band forward, and whether or not David Lynch was really conducting occult rituals through Twin Peaks: The Return. So follow XV Planets today and get caught up on the journey, because I can promise you, it only gets stranger from here. I'll see you on the fifth plane.
What scares you?
Ghosts, aliens,
Monsters?
the occult, conspiracies.
Some of you like to be scared, and unearthing paranormalcy is for you.
Some of you try everything you can to avoid it. Unearthing paranormalcy is for you.
We take the topics that scare some, and we dig in to find the source, then present the history to make the paranormal a little more normal.
We also throw in a bit of comedy to shed a light on some of the darkness in the world.
So whether you're scared of bumps in the night, what's inside your own mind, or strange lights in the sky, we cover it all.
We dig in and present all that we find and try to come up with some logical
and not so logical
reasons for the high strangeness happenings.
Sometimes we are scared of the things we don't understand, and the more we understand, the less we fear.
So find us, Unearthing Paranormalcy, on your favorite podcast app, and join us on Facebook, Instagram, and Discord at UMP Normalcy. And until next time,
keep digging.